Thank you for allowing us to sort of provide that framing of the rest of the presentations. I hope you'll find it useful as you see the other things that people are talking about. For now, it's a great pleasure, and I don't know if, Greta, you want to start coming up here, but it's a great pleasure to introduce Greta Landis, who's going to be the first of the presentations talking about the theory of change for the Dairy Innovation Hub and impact assessment. I've had the pleasure of working with Greta and the team at the evaluation unit for the last couple of years on this, but Greta's an evaluation specialist with the UW Division of Extension Natural Resources Institute, and her expertise includes environmental education programming and evaluation, farm management and decision support, conservation monitoring, and transdisciplinary research programs. That's a lot of ground to cover. Please welcome Greta to the platform here. Thanks. I don't know if you want a microphone, you want to stand behind here.
I'll go wriggle around a little here. That's nice. Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you for teeing that up so nicely, Chuck and Michaela. That was perfect. So as Chuck said, my name is Greta Landis, and I am here to talk about an ongoing but rapidly wrapping up project looking at emerging impacts from the Dairy Innovation Hub. Can you all hear me all right back there? All right, great. And starting to think through some of those long-term benefits from hub research activities. So Chuck mentioned some of this, but before I get started, I just wanted to introduce my team. So I'm part of a group of evaluators and research specialists at the Natural Resources Institute at Extension. So there's the core group of the team in accidentally matching Badger Red, who've been working on this particular project. But we're actually a group of 11 specialists and students, and we provide evaluation support for a variety of things, but that includes agricultural research initiatives and grant-funded projects, environmental science and community engaged science programs, practitioner trainings and farm technical assistance services, and more. So if you have questions about how your program is developing or the approaches that you're using and how well they're working or who you're reaching, those kinds of things, we help answer those. Feel free to give us a call. But for this particular project, I wanted to talk about the goals. So we've been working with Chuck for the last 2 years or so to develop, to document an interdisciplinary sample of the research activities happening in the hub and looking in more detail at how they address those key priority areas so we can further estimate those long-term societal and economic impacts and the emerging outcomes or the changes in meaningful behavior, learning, or conditions that result from research. So I'll say the Dairy Innovation Hub already does a phenomenal job documenting with annual reporting the research products and activities that come out of the hub, the types of collaborations people do and conferences they go to. So this is an opportunity for us to dig in a little deeper and look at those more long-term types of goals from the hub and really look at how they fit those 4 priority areas. So where are we working hardest to impact change? So the approach that we used to dig into this a little further was with semi-structured interviews with 16 different hub faculty members across the University of Wisconsin system. So we did, and as well as a handful of students and stakeholders. So we've been talking to researchers in the hub to learn more about what they do, their research activities, and their goals, like what they hope to accomplish with that work, as well as the key audiences they're trying to reach, and just trying to get a sense of what that work looks like within all the priority areas. So during those interviews, we also did some real-time systems mapping. So you probably can't see that very well in the back, but it's a type of software called Plectica that helps us try and illustrate sort of areas of logic and influence connecting different aspects, research activities. So then we went and did some thematic coding of those interview transcripts and analyzed those diagrams to look at how contribution and influence worked between different parts of research programs. And developed a model for each researcher that we interviewed to try and illustrate those relationships. So we'll be reporting back to the hub with kind of an aggregate theory of change, looking across all these 16 research projects at their areas of impact and potential changes, and reporting back this summer. So well, this is a little bit of a tee up for something that is still in development, but we'll talk more about it. So before I dig into some of our emerging findings, I wanted to talk a little bit about why use this theory of change. So this is an evaluation approach that came out of the 1990s, and is a way of looking at the underlying logic and context, some of what Chuck mentioned earlier, really looking at why we believe certain activities will result in certain outcomes. So trying to take stock of the situation, the context, the motivating factors, as well as the inputs of different resources and support, and see what kinds of outputs can actually lead to the types of changes that we want to make. So for this particular project, we use this approach in our interviews to look at how and where inputs from the Dairy Innovation Hub kind of contribute to research outcomes and successes, as well as trying to identify some unexpected or non-traditional outcomes in those the hub support and activities, trying to get at more of the squishier, relational, social science type aspects that we don't necessarily document in annual reporting, sort of changes in learning and skills. And we also wanted to try and clarify the intended audiences and beneficiaries to really make those explicit, who these different projects are trying to reach and the kinds of changes they hope to accomplish. So I'll show an overall aggregate version of this theory of change that we're developing for the hub, which is an updated version from what Chuck showed and still a draft version as the final one is coming. And then I'll dig into some of those emerging outcome areas that we're looking at in the hub. And I'll say before I dig into it, the outcome areas may seem sort of obvious to folks in a, some of those may seem sort of like obvious themes to come out, like why did you need to do a bunch of interviews to find this out? But it really helps us make explicit the kinds of changes that the hub is trying to make so we can further evaluate and do more long-term strategic planning and give the hub some tools to measure those long-term outcomes. So again, I don't expect folks to read this in the back, but this is just the aggregate theory of change to show it looks a little bit like a traditional logic model. So from those 16 interviews and some document review, we looked at aggregating researcher backgrounds, goals and priorities over on the far side, and research activities, looking at how they combine with resources and inputs, funding, and different types of support from the hub, and the research participants, students, collaborators that folks worked with, and then look to see sort of how those generated research outputs and a summary of outcomes or types of changes that we expect to see. So that's the part that I'll spend the majority of my time here talking about. So for the farm and business community, the emerging outcomes, as I said, may not look that surprising. So most of the work focused in this area was really around increasing profitability for dairy farmers and processors. So increasing farm profitability with a particular focus on using waste products and byproducts from dairy production. So using, as Chuck mentioned, whey proteins or manure, excuse me, getting ahead of myself here. So trying to use byproducts from dairy streams to create new opportunities for farmers. In addition to these kinds of new markets around supplements or value-added products from dairy production, we also saw a lot of projects aimed at on-farm efficiencies and tools. So reducing reliance on off-farm inputs like synthetic fertilizers and other, on off-farm inputs, maximizing nutrition for milk production and herd health. So we looked at projects that were examining different feed additives and digestibility attributes, as well as looking at decision support tools and models. This was a really big area in this particular outcome area or activity related to this outcome, looking at decision support tools, models, or sensors to help improve information availability for management. So helping producers with planning, with predicting yields, and with assessing even things like cattle body health or body condition and health to help make those reduce burden of decision making. So those two factors are a big part of increasing overall financial resilience. So trying to create more diverse opportunities for producers with new markets, as well as consumer education about what these best management practices actually do for dairy production, how they contribute to a value-added product for the consumer, and reducing some of those negative externalities related to land and water use in dairy production. So in the animal health and welfare priority area, we saw some major emerging outcomes around preventing and reducing disease. So using early diagnostics, buccal swabs, and other methods to really do early interventions and prevent pathogens and microbial diseases and protect herd health. We also heard a lot about increasing understanding of high quality diet. So at different strategies or at different stages of growth for cattle. So improving nutrition with feed supplements to reduce methane emissions that Chuck mentioned, or higher quality corn varieties and strategies to grow and harvest those at appropriate stages, and other attributes to really just hone in on animal nutrition. We also heard about reducing stress and discomfort to improve animal well-being, which is not an easily economically quantifiable feature necessarily, but has really big implications for farm management and employee training. So looking at projects that dealt with animal rest and digestion, that dealt with minimizing transportation and reducing pain and discomfort from the horn disbudding process, as well as just minimizing handling and doing more employee training around the farm. So we saw a lot of great projects looking at trying to increase understanding of animal behavior and best practices for farm safety. So managing horn disbudding pace and handling animals and assessing body condition, trying to monitor animals for pain management and pain responses. So those are the main areas that we saw in animal health and welfare. As far as emerging outcomes related to the land and water priority area, again, not surprising to this group, but saw a lot of effort on reducing pollutants from greenhouse gas emissions and runoff, increasing understanding of best practices for nutrient management, so use of manure and trying to reduce runoff, as well as improving accessibility of information related to environmental policy. We saw some great outcomes related to best management practices and trying to improve policy literacy and help farmers understand what kind of documentation might be helpful. We also saw a major theme of clean drinking water throughout all of these areas, but enhancing water quality and the health of aquatic ecosystems was a big part of these projects. We also heard from, as far as human health and nutrition, we saw a lot of great examples of health supplements and medical supplies from milk components and byproducts with huge potential for impact. Ways to address chronic health conditions, food sensitivities, illness, improve food safety using cold plasma and other methods in dairy processing. We also saw an interest in reaching underserved audiences. So we'll focus on more of this in our final report, but just looking at who gets access to healthy foods and products related to research in the Dairy Innovation Hub, as well as improving consumer education about nutrition from milk and dairy. So those were the 4 priority areas, but I also wanted to just say that when we came to those broader, squishier impacts, we saw a lot of great things about student development and training in these projects, which is, so just looking at hands-on research and field experiences, science communication and research competitions and intellectual property opportunities. There are so many great chances for students to get hands-on experiences in the hub. And building that new agricultural workforce and training with diverse interests is a big part of the emerging impacts of the hub. We also saw some this impact around, thank you, I'm wrapping up quickly here. All right. Finally, laying the groundwork with preliminary studies and building creative multidisciplinary collaborations was also a big part of this work that we hope to capture a little bit more in our final work. So I'll just say that understanding what motivates people is a big part of this work, and researchers range from care for animals to love of ice cream to challenging the status quo. So understanding what motivates this work helps us document sort of what comes into hub projects. So, all right, I will wrap up and just say stay tuned for an impact report coming this summer as we wrap up our final interviews. Thanks all.